On the afternoon of April 11, 2007 in Utah, USA, a 51-year-old father named Martin MacNeill took his youngest daughter, Ada MacNeill, home and then went to the kitchen to prepare lunch. Meanwhile, Ada searched the house for her mother. Her mother, Michelle MacNeill, had promised to pick her up from school, but her father came instead. The little girl wanted to ask her mother why she didn't come. Soon after, Ada discovered her mother in the bathroom. She was lying half in the bathtub, with her head submerged. The water had a strange reddish-brown color, her black hair floating on the surface with the ends gathered around the drain. Ada was only 6 years old, so she couldn't comprehend this horrifying scene. She tried to wake her mother up, but sadly, her mother would never hear her again. So what happened that year? Let's travel back in time with crime documentary files to 2007 in the United States to uncover today's case. Our main character, Michelle, was born and raised in a wealthy family in Concord, California. Her talents weren't limited to playing the violin skillfully. She was also the cheerleading captain and homecoming queen. With her striking beauty, outstanding talents, and excellent education, Michelle quickly became the idol of many young men, admired but seemingly unattainable. When Michelle was 20, at a party for single Mormons, she met Martin. Martin's attractive appearance and sophisticated demeanor made Michelle's heart flutter intensely. Like a young girl in love, she was ready to risk everything for her love. Just a few months later, despite strong opposition from her family, Michelle daringly eloped with Martin. Their whirlwind romance quickly ended in marriage when they had known each other for less than a year. After marriage, within 5 years, Michelle gave birth to 4 children for Martin, including 1 son and 3 daughters. But it seemed that Martin still felt 4 children weren't enough, so they adopted 4 more daughters from Ukraine. The burden of a family of 10 didn't seem to be an issue for them, as Michelle was truly wealthy. Moreover, Martin was a doctor with both reputation and money. The whole family lived a peaceful life, enjoying warmth and happiness every day. These seemingly perfect and warm days lasted for decades. However, throughout this time, Martin seemed to always be hiding some secrets. Whether it was due to getting used to married life and losing interest, or because Martin had changed, he no longer seemed to value the wife who had been by his side for nearly 30 years. From age 20 to over 50, the ravages of time are more apparent in women. Michelle had long lost the confidence of her youth. She gradually realized that the man she had once blindly pursued no longer loved her as before. Since then, Michelle also became increasingly dejected and sad. Depression and anxiety followed, and it seemed she wasn't the only one who was ill. On February 4th, 2007, Martin announced to everyone that he had cancer and other illnesses and only had a few months left to live. Everyone believed him. More than a month later, Martin's condition seemed to worsen as he began using a cane to walk. Perhaps he wanted to see his wife's youthful beauty one last time before he died, so he suggested Michelle get a facelift. Michelle always listened to her husband, but this time she felt very hesitant. On one hand, she worried about her high blood pressure and psychological issues potentially risking the surgery. On the other hand, she wanted to renew herself to win back her husband's heart. Michelle thought back and forth, and finally came up with a solution. She told her husband that she could have the surgery, but needed to wait for her blood pressure to decrease. She wanted to use this time to lose weight, so the surgery would be safer. However, she didn't expect that her husband's request for her to get a facelift wasn't a discussion, but an announcement. He had already arranged the surgery and shouted, "The money has been paid. The surgery can't be postponed. Are you going to do it or not?" Michelle had to obediently comply. On April 1st, this was the final consultation before surgery with the plastic surgeon. Noticing Michelle was still hesitant, but seemingly afraid of something, she couldn't postpone the surgery. After this consultation, Martin requested quite a few prescriptions from the doctor. On April 3rd, Michelle was taken into the operating room. Like her escape 30 years ago, she believed this man would bring her happiness. She believed that after the surgery, this man would love her as before. As the anesthesia needle pierced her skin, she gradually fell asleep. This surgery lasted from 8 a.m. until 3 p.m. Everything went smoothly and the surgery was very successful. However, the prolonged anesthesia still put quite a strain on her body. Therefore, the doctor suggested keeping the patient in the hospital for overnight observation. However, Martin strongly objected. He wanted to take his wife home. A tense argument ensued, and finally, after considering many aspects, he had to let Michelle stay in the hospital for overnight observation. For Martin, that night must have been very uncomfortable. As soon as he woke up the next morning, he rushed to pick up Michelle and take her home. Michelle's face was heavily bandaged, covering even her eyes. For a long time after surgery, what she needed most was rest and recovery. That day, their daughter Alexis, who was studying medicine, took time off school to come home and care for her mother. She stayed by her mother's side attentively all day until late at night. As night fell, fatigue began to overtake Alexis, causing her to start dozing off. Just then, Martin appeared with a fake concerned look, saying gently, "Go rest. Let me take care of Mom." Without suspicion, Alexis accepted her father's seemingly loving offer and went to her room to rest. Around 6 a.m. the next morning, Alexis woke up and hurriedly returned to her mother's room to relieve her father so he could rest. But the scene before her eyes left her stunned and panicked. Her mother, who had been alert and stable just the night before, now lay motionless on the bed, her face pale, her breathing weak. Michelle looked like she was on the brink of death. With her medical knowledge, Alexis couldn't explain this sudden change. She turned to Martin, her voice trembling with worry and suspicion. "Dad, what happened? How did Mom's condition become so terrible after just one night in your care?" But Martin replied, "Perhaps she overdosed on medication." This answer made Alexis both worried and angry, because everyone in the family knew Michelle rarely took medication, as she was very sensitive to drugs. How could her husband, who was also a doctor, give such an unreasonable explanation? Alexis felt her father seemed to be hiding something, but she didn't want to probe further as long as her mother recovered. That evening, while Alexis was bathing her mother, Michelle said, "Every time I wake up, Martin gives me medicine. I don't know what I've been taking. At night, when I vomit, he rushes over and gives me many other medications." Alexis was surprised to hear this, because facelift surgery absolutely doesn't require taking so much medication. Moreover, taking medication recklessly could be fatal, but no matter how much Alexis asked for details, her mother didn't want to say more, only repeating one sentence. "If anything happens to me, it's definitely not your father's doing." Then she burst into tears. Alexis was also shocked by this statement. Afterwards, she cared for her mother meticulously, reducing the medication use and recording each type of medication along with the time of use. On April 6th, Martin took Michelle to the hospital for a post-surgery checkup. The doctor said Michelle's wound was healing very well, her spirit was quite good, so she would recover soon. On April 10th, they went to the hospital again. By this time, Michelle had recovered almost completely, but strangely, Martin still asked the doctor to prescribe 30 more strong painkillers. During recovery, Michelle indeed needed to take 1 or 2 pills a day, but now she was almost fully recovered and didn't need any more medication. The doctor felt it was a bit odd, but still wrote the prescription. That day, Alexis had to return to school to continue her studies. After all, her mother had recovered almost completely, her health had no major issues, so even without her care, it would be fine. On the morning of April 11th, at 8:44 a.m., Michelle called her daughter Alexis. During this call, she expressed great joy because Martin had been taking care of her in recent days. At this moment, she was like a young girl discussing her crush with her best friend. After the phone call, Alexis could finally focus on her studies with peace of mind. At 9:10 a.m., Martin used his office phone to call Alexis, but she didn't receive it because she was in class at the time. Later, when Alexis saw the missed call, she felt very strange. Her father rarely called her. As far as she could remember, her father usually saved phone numbers directly into his mobile phone, rather than intentionally memorizing anyone's number. This meant that her father had looked up her number on his mobile phone, then used the office phone to call. So, why not use the mobile phone to call directly? This call seemed like a deliberate attempt to show that around 9 a.m. he was working seriously in the office. At 9:17 a.m., Martin left a voicemail for Michelle saying, "Don't call anyone, don't go anywhere. I'm very worried about you. I'll come home to make sandwiches for you. We'll have lunch together." That day, Martin was supposed to be on duty at a booth at the Development Safety Center exhibition, but he didn't show up at the exhibition until around 11 a.m. Not only was he late, but he was also very irritable, even being complained about by others. However, he seemed completely unconcerned about being complained about, repeatedly emphasizing that he had to leave immediately, had to pick up his daughter from school and take care of his sick wife. Around 11:30 a.m., he picked up his youngest daughter, Ada, from school and went home together. When they got home, Martin went straight to the kitchen to cook, while 6-year-old Ada went to look for her mother. Not long after, Ada ran into the kitchen and pulled her father's hand towards the bathroom. The little girl said urgently that Mom needed help. When Martin arrived at the bathroom, he saw Michelle not wearing pants, her upper body fallen into the bathtub, looking like she had slipped into the tub. He quickly told Ada to go call the neighbors for help because he couldn't lift Michelle out of the bathtub alone. At the same time, he also called 911. After the neighbors arrived, they worked together to get Michelle out of the bathtub and tried to perform CPR. Martin was a doctor, so everyone listened to him. He started performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on Michelle, while the neighbors did chest compressions. However, according to the neighbor doing chest compressions, when Martin was performing mouth-to-mouth on Michelle, they didn't see her chest moving up and down. At 11:55 a.m., the police arrived at the scene. They saw Martin shouting in agony, "Why did she have surgery? Why did she take so many medications?" As he shouted, he pounded on Michelle's chest. Clearly, he had given up hope. Notably, when the police continued CPR, a large amount of water flowed out of Michelle's mouth. Both were performing CPR, but Martin's actions seemed not as effective. At this point, the police asked what had happened, and Martin said, "This is my beloved wife. She just had a facelift surgery. She's been taking a lot of medication recently. It must be due to the effects of the medication that she fell into the bathtub." The police saw Martin wearing a white coat, so they believed what he said. At 12:19 p.m., the ambulance arrived and took Michelle away. The emergency doctor received a pale and cold Michelle. Her heart had completely stopped beating. The doctor was very confused. Usually, CPR could make the patient's skin color somewhat rosy again, but the woman before him didn't look like she had been rescued in time. However, the doctor still wanted to try one more time to see if they could save her. Unfortunately, they ultimately failed. Unexpectedly, Michelle's words from a few days ago had become reality. At 2 p.m. that day, Martin returned home from the hospital. After hearing the news, the children also rushed back one by one. Martin asked his daughter Erin to clean up her mother's medications, saying he didn't want to see objects that reminded him of his wife. Erin complied without thinking, but after cleaning up, she suddenly realized that these things could be evidence. She asked Martin why he told her to do this, but he refused to answer. Previously, Alexis, who had been caring for her mother devotedly, also discovered something was amiss. Not only did the medications mysteriously disappear, but even her meticulous records of her mother's medication use vanished. Even her mother's personal belongings had been cleaned out, as if someone was trying to erase all traces. Martin seemed to realize that his actions were being suspected. To prove his innocence, he told his daughter, "We must complete the autopsy. That way people won't blame me for your mother's death." The autopsy results were as he expected. The report showed that Michelle had cardiovascular disease, and the direct cause of death was drowning. The conclusion was natural death. However, Alexis didn't believe these results. She still believed that her mother's death was not natural, and it must have been caused by her father. She even changed her last name and vowed never to use her father's surname again. She began collecting evidence and rallying her siblings to her side, determined to seek justice for her mother. When they started investigating Martin, they discovered that this happy family had been a lie all along. The father they respected and admired turned out to be a highly intelligent criminal. He was violent, cold, deceitful, untrustworthy, his entire life full of falsehoods. Martin MacNeill was born on February 1st, 1956, in Kenton, New Jersey. Unlike Michelle, he grew up in a poor family with 5 siblings. Not only were circumstances difficult, but his parents also argued constantly. The stories about Martin's past, revealed by Anna, his lover, further illuminated the dark nature that had formed very early on. With frightening pride, Martin recounted how he tried to kill his own mother when he was just 8 years old, as well as how he skillfully staged the natural death of his brother. In 1973, Martin enlisted in the military. When the military examined his health, they discovered he was a psychiatric patient. He confessed that obsessive images often appeared in his mind, urging him to commit murder. Recognizing the potential danger, the military decided to prohibit Martin from handling firearms. Less than 2 years later, he requested leave due to mental health issues. He deceived the military, claiming he was completely unable to study and work anymore. For over 30 years after that, he received nearly $100,000 in benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Later, even his transcript for medical school admission was forged. On February 21st, 1978, he married Michelle. 4 months after the wedding, Martin was sentenced to 6 months in prison for forgery, theft, and fraud. However, Michelle didn't leave him because of this. Afterwards, they had 4 children. In 1994, Martin was accused of having an affair with a patient. Michelle was heartbroken and wanted a divorce, but Martin threatened that he would do something reckless. In August 2000 and 2005, Michelle caught Martin watching pornography twice. She expressed her desire for divorce, but Martin continued to threaten her. Some might say, just for watching pornography, she wanted a divorce, isn't that excessive? Actually, watching pornography is a major taboo in the Mormon faith. Therefore, a devout believer like Michelle couldn't accept her husband, also a believer, watching such films. In March 2005, Martin began an extramarital affair with his lover, Anna. During one intimate encounter, Anna was nearly choked to death by Martin. Not only was he physically rough, but he also said threatening words. He asked Anna if she wanted to die in his hands, and he knew how to use various drugs to make it look like a natural death. In November of the same year, Anna cut off contact with Martin. However, soon after, Martin met another lover online named Gypsy Willis, who said, "We met a few times each month. It was very casual. As long as we had time, we could arrange to meet. About half the time we met, we were intimate." February 21st, 2007, was Martin and Michelle's wedding anniversary. Daughter Alexis discovered a suitcase full of women's clothes in her father's car. She told her mother about this discovery. On March 16th, when Michelle and her daughter secretly checked Martin's call history, there was a number that appeared frequently. Therefore, Michelle had a big argument with Martin about this. Also around that time, Martin announced to everyone that he had cancer and was about to die. In fact, he didn't know that Michelle and the daughters had secretly seen his examination report. He wasn't sick at all. It was because Michelle already knew her husband wasn't ill that she agreed to get the facelift surgery. In her eyes, perhaps becoming more beautiful could make her husband return to her and stay away from his mistress. Afterwards, under Martin's strong insistence, Michelle had the facelift surgery and then passed away. Although there was no direct evidence, all the suspicious points pointed towards Martin. He disregarded Michelle's high blood pressure and psychological issues, insisting on the surgery, and even asked the doctor to prescribe 5 different medications. On the night of April 4th, Martin began implementing his plan. He continuously gave Michelle medication, making her take pills every time she woke up, forcing her if she didn't want to. When Michelle vomited many pills in the middle of the night, he rushed over and continued giving her more medication. On April 5th, Alexis discovered her mother's condition was very poor, so she began caring for her mother herself. By April 10th, her mother had recovered almost completely. But Alexis couldn't have imagined that just one day after she left, her mother would die in the bathtub. Not only her daughter, but even the doctor who examined Michelle found it hard to believe. Although Michelle had high blood pressure and psychological issues, her body was very healthy and couldn't suddenly pass away. Moreover, before the incident, she had almost stopped taking medication. There was no reason to suddenly take many medications on April 11th unless someone forced her to. The most suspicious point was Martin's statement. He said Michelle wasn't wearing pants, looked like she was about to take a bath, but then fainted and fell into the bathtub, then drowned. However, Ada, the young daughter who first discovered Michelle, said her mother was wearing dark workout clothes lying in the bathtub. It looked like she had fainted and then been put into the bathtub by someone because no one would lie in a bathtub fully clothed. Ada was only 6 years old. Could she be lying? There was also a coroner who examined Michelle who wrote in his report, Michelle's legs, back, and buttocks had bruises. This suggested she died lying on her back, not slumped over the bathtub as Martin said. Many signs indicated Martin was lying. In the 911 call, he said he was performing CPR, but in reality, he wasn't doing anything. Later, when the neighbors arrived, he perhaps only pretended to do it for show. He even wiped away some suspicious blood stains in front of the neighbors. However, suspicious points ultimately remained just suspicious points. Without evidence, no one could be arrested. But this was enough to get the police's attention. Therefore, an investigation into him was being conducted quietly. Afterwards, Martin organized a funeral for Michelle. However, he only allowed a few people from Michelle's family to attend. At the funeral, Martin hardly said anything about Michelle, but only introduced himself. He talked about how miserable his life had been, speaking sincerely and emotionally. It seemed like the person in the coffin wasn't his wife, but himself. He was lamenting for himself. At the dinner table, Martin started saying, I'll have to get used to the life of a single man, can only play with friends and golf. Then he laughed to himself. It's unclear if it was a bitter laugh or if he was genuinely happy. Michelle's sister found this not funny at all, even disgusting. At this funeral, Martin even invited his mistress Willis. In fact, their relationship had never been interrupted, even during the days right after Michelle's death, and even during the funeral ceremony. After the funeral, Martin's attitude towards the children got increasingly worse. He kicked Alexis, who always suspected him, out of the house. He found a nanny for the children, but this person didn't do anything. Didn't pick up the children, didn't do laundry, didn't cook. And this nanny was actually Martin's mistress, Willis. On May 23rd, Martin had inappropriate intimate actions with Alexis, even caressing her. He kissed her hand and said, "Oh, sorry, I miss your mother so much. I thought you were her." By July, Martin had arranged for his adopted daughter, Giselle MacNeill, to return to Ukraine. It should have only taken 2 months for her to come back, but in reality, Giselle stayed in Ukraine for nearly a year. This was because Martin had lent Giselle's identity to his mistress, Willis. Willis owed tens of thousands of dollars in taxes. Doing this, they not only didn't have to pay the money anymore, but also got rid of a burden. In June 2008, Martin called his daughter Vanessa over. Vanessa had been using illegal substances for a long time, so this time she thought her father wanted her to go to rehab. However, her father held her hand and said, "I will end your life, then end my own." Fortunately, this time it was just a threat, and Martin didn't actually act. But these words terrified Vanessa. It turned out Martin said this because he always felt Vanessa embarrassed him. Actually, little Ada was Vanessa's child with an ex-boyfriend. Because of the out-of-wedlock pregnancy, if this news spread, it would cause the family to lose face completely. Martin was a person who cared a lot about face, so he kept Ada under the pretense of adoption. Therefore, Ada had to call her birth mother sister and her grandmother mother. By 2009, Martin had been arrested and imprisoned for identity theft. During his time in prison, the police investigation and his daughter's investigation into him had also come to an end. Could justice prevail in a case with almost no evidence? On January 16th, 2010, Damien, the only son in the family, ended his life by overdosing on prescription drugs. Before his death, he suddenly became quite aggressive. Over the years, he had endured the pain of losing his mother. In fact, in his heart, he knew clearly that the killer was very likely his own father. He really couldn't live with the person who had killed his mother. Or perhaps because he studied law, he felt the hope of convicting his father was too slim. In October of that year, the natural death conclusion in the autopsy report was changed to undetermined. The doctor pointed out that the combination of several different drugs, such as Valium, Lortab, Percocet, Ambien, and Phenergan, could very likely cause difficulty breathing, loss of consciousness, respiratory depression, and coma. This meant that on the morning of April 11th, in 1 or 2 hours before 11 a.m., Martin had returned home, forced Michelle to take multiple medications, causing her to lose consciousness, then carried her into the bathtub and ran the water to drown her. In 2011, Willis was also sentenced to 3 years in prison for participating in the identity theft scheme. In July 2012, Martin was released from prison. Subsequently, the Utah Attorney General's office charged him with killing Michelle. On October 17, 2013, Martin's trial began. The prosecution turned Martin's life inside out. It was only then that people truly learned about Martin's real character. His 2 lovers, some of his daughters, the girlfriend of his only son Damien, Michelle's plastic surgeon, and even inmates who had been in prison with Martin all testified in court. At this point, Martin had become the center of attention. Everyone wanted to put him in prison. The lead prosecutor said, "This was an almost perfect murder. Martin gave her a lot of medication. He knew that once she died, it would be very difficult to detect." However, the defense declared that Martin's past misdeeds couldn't lead to the conclusion that Michelle's death was related to him. They even told a parable in court. The defense wanted to tell the jury not to jump to conclusions and not to let emotions sway them. But no matter how well the defense spoke, Martin still couldn't explain what he had done during that time on the morning Michelle died. Moreover, his other behaviors were also very unusual. Lying about having cancer, pretending to use a cane to make people believe he couldn't move Michelle alone, lying to 911 causing delays in rescue efforts, lying to investigators leading to the cause of death being determined as natural. There were too many suspicious points that he himself couldn't explain. Therefore, everyone believed that Martin had the motive, the time, and the ability to kill his wife Michelle. After 22 days of trial, on November 9, 2013, in a situation without direct evidence, the court relied on testimonies from many people, Martin's past, and many suspicious points about him to convict Martin of first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and sexual abuse, with a sentence of 17 years without parole. When hearing the verdict, some of the daughters couldn't hold back their tears. People had gotten the truth, but the price paid was too high. Looking back at this case, Martin was the source of chaos. Neither his beautiful wife nor his lovely children could change his nature. It seemed that killing in his mind wasn't a terrible crime. His behavior had many similarities with cold psychopaths. Lack of empathy, no sense of guilt, no fear, but extremely selfish, arrogant, and prone to lying. Martin was truly a cruel person, treating murder as casually as cutting grass, seeing nothing significant about it. Moreover, he didn't realize it was wrong. So when he wanted to live with his mistress, he used a combination of drugs to make Michelle die naturally, instead of thinking like a normal person about divorce or maintaining an extramarital relationship. He felt that was too troublesome. Killing Michelle would be more convenient and quicker. And that's the story for today. Please like, share, and subscribe to support our channel. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.